Hello, moms, dads, and grands, and welcome back to M4L Academy. I'm Missy Karwowski, and if you're new here, well, I like to say that we're the school for parents, grandparents, and friends who are dedicated to preserving liberty with a special focus on topics and issues that impact kids, schools, and of course, parental rights. If you're not familiar with Moms for Liberty, well, it's a parental rights advocacy group. And since advocacy can mean so many things, we're taking a behind the scenes look at just how Moms for Liberty chapters and members advocate. While parental rights are without question a fundamental right, sometimes the things you'd think are common sense turn out to be not so common, which is why we need policies and laws to protect families. And so we'll be talking with Charlie Misseijer, Moms for Liberty's legislative and policy director, as well as some of our boots on the ground, fantastic legislative committees. And then we have a special conversation with Representative Samantha Fett from Iowa. She's a mom who started in Moms for Liberty and then took that all the way to the Capitol. We'll get to hear a little bit about that journey and the incredible impact she is having in her state. The legislative process sometimes feels like a black box of mystery, which is why we're here to help. All right, let's get into it. Welcome back to class. People just don't really necessarily even understand the legislative process and how things work because, frankly, a lot of adults either maybe we didn't pay attention in class or maybe weren't really deeply taught it or didn't care at the time. So can you just kind of do a high level walkthrough of the basic legislative process?
What I do, I wear a lot of hats, but one of the primary responsibilities that I was brought on for was to, yes, we're pushing up. It was described to me at the county level, school board level, as far as policy is concerned, but we also wanted to pressure down at the state level and really try to push policy there and watch that trickle down. And so the process that we follow is setting up what we call legislative committees here at Moms for Liberty in each state. And we don't cover all the states just yet. It's a process, as you know, but we are in 25 of 50 states, and we fill out these legislative committees with chapter membership throughout the state. Each chapter has that wants to participate. They don't have to, but each chapter of Moms for Liberty in the state can send a representative to sit on this committee. Sometimes they're chapter leaders, like a chair or vice chair, or one of their officers. Sometimes they're just members, but they will come to the legislative committee, and each county can have one vote on that committee. One of their first responsibilities once they adopt the bylaws and code of conduct and become an official committee and can use our official Moms for Liberty in their state logo, uh, is coming up with a set of legislative priorities. And so the legislative priorities are there so that it can lend direction to the committee's work and also inform those that they want to work with, what type of legislative goals that we have and want to achieve through the legislative process in their state. And ultimately, and this is the first thing I preach, ultimately we exist, the purpose of the state legislative committee is to win. I mean, at the end of the day, we are there to win. And so ultimately, through the training that I give to each committee, it is, to focus on winning at the state level, but winning within mission. And so knowing our mission, understanding it, and exercising it through this legislative process. And so there's many ways that we can go about talking for the or about this as far as strategically, but at the end of the day, we want to win through the existence of these legislative committees.
So let's, I'm, I would say that I've heard it argued that pushing legislation, because some people may say, oh, you're a parental rights advocacy group. Why are you trying to do laws? And so, we're more for smaller government, of course. But as we're advocating for these bills, some people think, oh, well, are you expecting the government to solve your problems instead of actually being a parent? So, as an example, the social media bans for minors, that we're seeing across the globe in other countries right now. I'm not saying that I'm not advocating for or against a ban here. I'm simply using it as an example of government intervention that a lot of people would probably just say, well, shouldn't parents just be deciding whether or not their kids have social media and making, being on top of them? So that concept. So why do we get involved with legislation at all? Can you speak to or respond to how, whether or not we're expecting the government to do our job as parents?
We need to uh, give our parents the tools and the resources that they need, and make them privy to these things that are out there that can help them, yeah, assist them in doing their job of parenting. I don't think there's anything wrong with that in trying to arm them with the tools that they need, to do their job as a parent. And we're not telling them that they have to use it. We're not, demanding that or commanding that they use it. But we are giving them, the Swiss Army knife, and then you decide, what portion of that you want to use, or part of that you want to use, in order to, you know, help your situation out better.
Yeah, seriously. And I think that's a really good point to emphasize that this is a tool in our toolbox, and there are things that should be logical, but they just aren't. And there are organizations, there are industries that will take advantage of someone who maybe doesn't know all the things about that particular industry. It reminds me of years ago, I learned about, I want to say it was maybe the turn of the century, would be the very early 1900s, I think, that there was something about selling milk that they would put like chalk and other things into the milk to make it more white and look cleaner. And so they were putting all these terrible things that people should not be ingesting. Which feels like that would just turn into a kind of a weird slurry and not really be milk, but whatever. But they were doing all these very terrible things that people, are expecting that the milk they're buying is good. And that's a way that I always see that. It's not like we're telling or expecting that the government is solving all of our problems as a parent, but they're putting protections in place to ensure that parents are set up for success in what they're
Well, yeah,
doing.
even the early iteration of the FDA, right?
Mm,
And it came about largely because of Upton Sinclair's work, the Jungle, and they found in these production processes of food. I mean, even rat feces was getting mixed up in this stuff and making people violently ill and even death. And so this was here to give some basic guidelines and standards, and so we're asking for that as well, some basic guardrails, in these areas of tech. So it's not a free for all, and a quick pathway to, where for our kids. We need to do what we can to protect them, and again, resource our parents with the tools that they can use, that they can choose to use in order to protect their families better.
So if a parent has never been super involved in the legislative process and maybe never even thought to follow a bill, and we're sending out a text or a message or an email saying, hey, this is going to happen, or call to action to call your senators, what would be a simple first step to getting oriented for someone who's like never done this before?
Well, first of all, I would say, become involved. If you're a Moms for Liberty member, become involved with the legislative side of things. I think it's important to be keyed in. I have what I call the three R's of legislative committee work, and that is relationships, realistic expectations, and relevant strategies. And one of the first things we need to do after, coming up with our list of legislative priorities, or as we're doing it, is to start build relationships within your Moms for Liberty legislative committee, but then also outward looking relationships with like-minded policy groups. Because you have to remember, and I tell all our committees this in training, remember that your legislators are not subject matter experts. They
Hmm.
get so many things that cross their desk, right? They have to visit hundreds of issues per session. I mean, literally hundreds of bills, if not over 1,000 bills in some of these states, are brought per session. And so there's no way they can be experts in all of these areas. And I repeated that line to some legislators last week. And they said, yeah, absolutely. We don't know all about this issue right here. And we would love to know more. And we would love to be, resourced. They don't know it all, but we're coming together and collaborating, in these areas that we can really move the dial on specific policies. So build relationships is a huge area. And you say, well, I don't know anybody, in my legislature. Well, I would say start by getting to know your representative. Get to know your representatives. That means your state House member or assemblyman and your state senator. You start there, and you can go by their office. You can make an appointment. Um, if you have a legislative committee in your state from Moms for Liberty, take their legislative priority sheet and visit with them and just introduce, hey, we're Moms for Liberty. This is our mission. We want to help you. I mean, that's really the message. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go in, spitting bullets. You can just say, hey, look, we're Moms for Liberty. This is what we're about. Again, this is our mission. We're here to educate, unify, and empower parents. And these are the ways we do it, through these legislative priorities that we have. Is there any way that we can help you, resource you, work with you, and that you'd work with us? So
I,
that's a good way. That's a good way to start.
Yeah, I love that. The relationships I think is so important. And that is something, especially in today's world, that people need to remember. I think is a real key point that people, the world is looking for relationships and opportunities to connect. And so that just goes a really, really long way if you go beyond sending an email, sending a DM on their social media, whatever, and actually making that connection.
Yeah, when you make that connection, that's a personal connection, and
Hmm.
you know exchange information on how to communicate. You'll be surprised. You do this a few times. Even the first time I sat down this year in my home state that I live in now, South Carolina, and Wes Clymer, he
Mm.
actually was chair of a committee on the parental rights bill, subcommittee on the parental rights bill that I testified on. And he said, look, I really appreciate what you guys did in testifying in support of that bill. And, call me anytime, that kind of thing. And you'll be surprised. They may actually give you their personal contact number. I know moms that call their representatives while they're on the floor, and say, look, this is how we feel about this bill. They're watching them on this, CCTV. This is how we feel about this bill. This is how you should vote on it. This is, where we stand on it. And, they actually, you'd be surprised, they welcome that help. I do want to say this before I get too far ahead of myself, but these legislative committees also provide one voice that we speak through. We are very democratic in the way in which we do things, as far as the legislative committee voting whether they're going to push for an issue in their state or not. And it takes, a 60% vote in order for something, majority vote in order to get something across the line to support. But that's left up to the committee. And I follow the intuition of our committee in that state. So something that we may support in Texas may not fly in New Jersey, and vice versa, but also we want that one voice to speak through the legislative committee. And so that's another reason why it's structured the way that it is.
I think that's really important because the fact of the matter is that most people aren't going to agree on absolutely everything. Everyone's going to have the things that are most important to them. And we have a mission that we outline. And I love that we look for unity on certain key aspects and work together that way. That kind of answers this question, but a little bit. I'm hearing a tiny bit of it, but I wanted to ask what does it look like when a chapter or member of the legislative committee starts working on an issue? So you've identified the legislative priorities. What are the key steps that people, our members or chapters would follow once they identify a problem and are ready to get working on it? What does that look like?
First of all, they choose their priorities, right? And they do that based upon also whether the issue is mission focused. I would run through these questions before supporting a bill. Does it align with your organizational mission? Okay. Um, Number two question I'd ask is it enforceable? We
Mm,
talked a little bit about this before we started recording today, but is this going to be enforceable? Because if it's not, I mean, it's just going to be words on a paper.
yep.
Thirdly, I would say, is it legally durable? Is it legally durable? We have this new model policy, right? AI in education as far as guardrails, and one of the questions that really we'd want to answer through that is this legally durable. Fourthly, is it politically achievable?
Mm,
This is another question. Is it politically achievable? And this is a more important question than you may think, because we want wins, yes, but legislators want wins too.
hmm.
And rarely do they like to go into sponsoring a bill that is a loser,
Yeah.
right? That has losing propositions. So is it politically achievable? Um, Another question, is it fiscally viable? And this is an area that
Mm,
sometimes gets ignored, but there's going to always be questions about, this. Bathroom bills, I'll just throw that out as a quick example. But again, I'll use South Carolina because I sit here. But one of the big questions is, well, if we're going to have boys' bathrooms and girls' bathrooms, and then gender, if there's got to be like a gender neutral bathroom provided, how much is that going to cost, right? And that's a common refrain throughout the country when they're visiting this idea of gender neutral bathrooms, right? How much is that going to cost when you project that over all the schools, et cetera? And then another question: does it create unintended consequences? And so I think these are all fair questions to ask before supporting a bill. But again, through this, you're having these discussions with your committee, with your legislators. In so doing, you're building trust with them and becoming really a resource instead of just a critic. And that's what I really
hmm.
emphasize our committees as well, is be a resource, see yourself as a resource rather than just some railing, screaming critic.
Yep.
I think that's important for our parents to note.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it really does come down to relationships. It's so important. And all of those questions though are great. I'll make sure that we call those out because those are really good questions to consider as you're putting things through.
You mentioned the call to action. I would say there's other effective advocacy methods within the operation, and I'll just mention those quickly as well. But you do have the call to action, right? That's where the committee would put out, hey, this is going down, or this is what we're doing, on a certain issue. This is happening. Email and text can be great. We don't all live close to a capital.
Yeah.
So out west, you may be very far from the capital. And
Yeah.
so you may rely upon email and text, but they also, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the hearing turnout. So, like when I give testimony on a bill, or any of our parents do, our legislators also want to be encouraged. They said, look, on the parental rights bill, the transgender lobby came out strong, LGBT plus lobby against the parental rights bill. And
Yeah.
I don't know if they bust people in or what, but there were so many people that were there speaking out against the bill. That particular day, we happened to have an equal turnout for the bill, for the parental rights bill, but that's not typical. The legislator that I met with after, who was chairing that subcommittee, said, look, there's bills that we think should have a room full of people in support, and maybe 2 to 5 people come out and 100 people come out in opposition. So, we want to turn out for those hearings because if they're only hearing from the other side, they very well may end up tabling that legislation or voting against it, God forbid. Um, Social media coordination, right? This is huge. That's another way to effectively advocate and mobilize. Press releases, and then one one big area with us, and I'm part of this, is volunteer management. Just by right of what my job is managing our volunteers and making sure that they're functioning in a healthy manner. So those are ways that we can effectively mobilize our grassroots as well.
Those are that's all super good advice, truly. It genuinely is. We've talked about some of the process. We've talked about the way that our legislative committees prioritize or select priorities, etc., building policies and then pushing them forward. Can you give, I don't know, one or two examples? Just walk us through what these model policies or legislation looked like. You mentioned the AI bill. I know there's other ones that Moms for Liberty have created, or chapters across the country have created, have put forward. Just walk us through what they look like and what that process was to get it across the finish line.
Yeah, so we haven't written or authored a lot of model policy on our own.
Hmm.
We usually do that in conjunction with some of our allies, our organizational allies. Um, we've got a lot of great ones out there, and I just came back from a few conferences where we spent time with them. You and I were at Teacher Freedom Alliance a few weeks ago. The week before, I was gone for 3 weeks in a row, but the week before, I was in San Diego at the ADF summit, and ADF is Alliance Defending Freedom, Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty. They do, yes, a legal firm, but also a lot of policy work in and around Wisconsin. They do a lot of school board stuff, policy wise, and they've published those, and so model policy that way that I've pointed people to in the past. Um, School boards for academic excellence. They're at some of these SBAE. It's a newer group, maybe even a little younger than us, but they have put out some great resources that way as well. I'll take ADF since I just mentioned them, but they have really written a parental rights model bill that I think is, just looking at what was there and what they have with the non-negotiables they've put in it. And I mentioned a few of those earlier, but like one is the word fundamental, that parents have the fundamental right to raise their children as they see fit, right? And that, of course, sets it as a higher tier right on par with um, our First Amendment rights. That these rights are, the idea that these rights are granted by God, not government, and so what God gives, government cannot take away. However, and I get pushed back, well, then why do we need a parental rights bill if these are natural rights, these are natural rights given by God, and at the end of the day, yeah, they're natural rights given by God, but can the government still effectively take away rights? I mean, if they didn't, we probably wouldn't have to exist.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's unfortunately, I when we were in California too in the beginning of June, that was something that Matt Sharp from ADF was talking about. The importance. He talked about it as recognizing rights, just really articulating. Yes, we know we have these, but now we're going to really officially articulate it and recognize it so that it gives it more protection. And I think that's such an important piece for doing these.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, this is part of the education process too. I mean, I grew up understanding that fundamental truth, and the type of home that I grew up in, that these are God given rights and that no one can take them away. But we live in a day and age where a lot of people aren't taught that. This comes as an epiphany to them, perhaps, later in life. And sad but true. And so you're educating through these bills, you're recognizing through these bills that this simply exists, and that the government needs to continue to recognize that they exist, because yeah, unless they just take away your rights, because we know that that's been done throughout history. I mean, really since the beginning of time.
And I
Yeah.
would recommend for everyone, go to m4lacademy.org/AI or momsforliberty.org/AI to see the model legislation that we've put together and the model policy for school boards.
Let me say this, Missy, in relation to like the AI bill, the one that we did
Sure.
author, right?
Yeah.
Um, that came about because there's a need, right? And that's why legislation should come about if there's a need, right? We shouldn't just be making stuff up to make stuff up, but there's a need. You know, this new challenge has arisen to education and to our child's children's safety, and so we feel that, hopefully fill that need as far as guardrails to this impending challenge by by writing legislation to provide some guardrails. And so as far as practically speaking, a committee's responsibility should be, when you take a model bill, is to read it carefully, understand its impact, identify like its legal concerns, and then go from there, right? In
Hmm.
discussion with your sponsor legislator, that hopefully you'll get to run that bill through the House and Senate, your legislature. And so you don't have to know everything about the process. Your legislator will. It's good to be aware of, you know, have a basic understanding of the legislative process, where things could get hung up and where you may need to, unhink them a little bit and try to get it moving again if it gets stuck in the process. Again, just you kind of lean on each other with that legislator who has promised to sponsor that bill and shepherd it through the legislative process for you.
If you could give a brand new advocate in the Moms for Liberty group, either as a member or a chapter chair or on the legislative committee, if you can give, well, if they're on the legislative committee, they probably already are doing stuff. But so give a brand new parental rights advocate one simple assignment for this week. What would be the first thing that you would give to them? Pulling out your teacher vibes.
So, well, I guess I would say this then: find somebody that you can that can mentor you through the process. A good way to do this, Missy, is by attending your legislative day. If your Moms for Liberty legislative committee puts one of those on, which I'm really encouraging each one to do once a year. I'd want them to go through that in real time with somebody, because that's how I learn. I learn best by doing, and I think most people, whether they admit that or not, I mean, once they do it, they've done it. And they can say, "I've done that. I feel more comfortable with that." It may not be comfortable, but they're more comfortable with it than before, because now they've experienced it. And this lady that I walked around with Washington D.C. on Capitol Hill Day, I just was able to see her. She was there in Dallas with us, and she was just like still thanking me for that day. Oh, thank you so much. I felt so much better. I now know what to do. And she was, she's a regular old hat at it now. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I would say.
Mentorship is so helpful, and that's one of the great things I think that Moms for Liberty offers is you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. We've got a great community of joyful warriors that will help you learn the ins and outs of how this works. Plus, we have Charlie who can teach you all the other things too. We love having you on, especially to be able to talk through some of these pieces, because the legislative stuff can sometimes feel like a dark mystery box of what happens. People go off to the Capitol and all of a sudden bills come out, and why don't these ones come faster, and all of that stuff. So it can be very confusing. So I appreciate you walking us through the process.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And if there's any way that I can, help anybody in this area, I certainly, it's what I do. It's a big part of my job. And if you don't have a legislative committee in your state, we certainly and yet you have chapters. I really do need a chapter to have a foothold, and all our states have chapters right now except Kentucky, and we're looking to get one started there. So if you don't have a legislative committee, then please reach out. I'd love to start one in your state and work with you to start winning there as well.
That's right. And if I would say, so if there are chapters that your state doesn't have it, so they contact your chapter chair, reach out to any of us, go on to momsforliberty.org, and there is contact us areas, so you can definitely reach out to us. We will make sure that we get it done and help you get started, because that's what we're here for, is to help go for the wins, right?
And also, Missy has a ton of great resources online, and I feel like they're, not everybody knows that, and so I want to highlight that. There's a lot of great stuff in all different policy areas, and so please visit M4LA and see what's there, glean from it when you can.
Yeah, and we'll get these policies up. We're making sure to highlight them more and more, so that policies and legislative bills, so that people can take it and go do it in their states. So I am so excited now, because we've had this is our exploration into the legislative committee, the legislative side of Moms for Liberty, because it's one of the ways that we advocate, and that is in our legal system. Sometimes it can feel a little confusing, though, and a lot of people sort of feel like, if they even know what the legislative process is, which I hate to say it, I think that a lot of people don't, it can feel a little bit like a black box. You send someone off to the state capitol, and then stuff happens, and all of a sudden laws start changing in your local community. So we're going to learn a little bit about how Moms for Liberty has an impact in that. So the term legislative committee can sound intimidating, like I said, to the average mom and dad and citizen. And I think it's pretty fair to say lots of people don't know, especially even younger people, I'd say, don't actually know how the whole legislative process works. So for you, what does this work look like in the day-to-day and week-to-week on your legislative committee?
What we do in Maryland is we try to monitor what's going on in the legislature, in the General Assembly, which meets from January to April in our state, and then they're done. So we try to monitor that. And in the off season, as we call it, we contact legislators, lawmakers, and talk to them about what does the next session look like for you? What can we do to help you? And how can we be involved? And then we meet on a regular basis via Zoom, and we just discuss what's going on and what our priorities are going to be. And everybody has a job, so we all work on our responsibilities.
You highlighted something that, Jack, maybe you can speak to. I have a feeling you guys are going to say similar, but Jack, let's go to you next. What does your day in the life, or week in the life, or year in the life of the Legislative Committee in New Jersey look like? And maybe you can speak to why it's so important to be building relationships outside of session, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the legislative team is vitally important. This is where the rubber hits the road with the laws. If you really want to make changes, you have to do it within the legislature. Otherwise, you're always on the outside looking in. We'll be demonstrating forever. But until you get into the legislature and build the relationships and so on and so forth, and influence them to vote the correct way, or our way, which is, I think, the correct way, then it's vitally important that happens. And that's how I got involved. I had been going to our local school board and complaining with my 3 minutes, and got very frustrating to me. So I got involved with Moms for Liberty locally in Camden County, and then I got frustrated there because I knew the action was in Trenton, which is our capital. So I wanted to really get into the legislative part, and I don't think that was just about the time when Charlie was starting this group up, and so I jumped on.
Well, I think you guys do a great job representing, because I've heard wonderful things and see the work that you get done. Now let's jump over to Jenny, and you can explain a little bit of what goes on in your state as well. And do you do anything different or unique, or maybe speaking also to the importance of those relationships?
We are very similar to what Jan and Jack are doing here in North Carolina. Uniquely, we have about 100 counties in our state, which makes it a little more complicated because of the amount of counties we have. I think we have approximately 35 active chapters with the state. I am a newer chapter. We started in July of 25, so we are right now at our year. So I am a beneficiary of a great legislative committee who's been doing a lot of hands-on, boots on the ground work with the legislatures here in North Carolina. We're talking and working with other organizations such as NC Values and Pavement Education Project, which are organizations here in North Carolina that are very dedicated to making sure that the laws that are before the House and the Senate are getting passed. And so I've gotten the opportunity to just see some really amazing women doing some amazing work. And we've got some men as well and some grandparents, not just parents. Working together has been the key piece.
I'm hearing a consistent thread of communication and relationship building. And I do want to highlight real quick, as everyone can probably tell, that Jack is not a mom in Moms for Liberty. And that's because we do incorporate everyone. We welcome everyone in. Obviously, Moms for Liberty was started by moms, and that is our primary makeup. But this is really for everyone who cares about defending parental rights and fighting for the future of America, really.
For me, it always comes with an explanation. When I say I'm Moms for Liberty, I have to explain, because everybody expects women. Frankly.
Yep, that's exactly right. But we have Dads for Liberty and Grandparents for Liberty, and all working together. It just happens to be, under the umbrella of Moms for Liberty. Didn't want to assume your gender or anything, Jack.
Yeah, I always said I don't even identify to be a mom. I found out early on it's too difficult of a job to be a mom. So I'll take the dad.
Pass on that one if possible. But no, all kidding aside, best job ever. So one of the things that I'm hearing in this and the consistency between you guys is the effectiveness of your legislative committees individually. That's a lot of communication and organization that has to happen across the state. So let's start with Jack, if you don't mind. You talked a little bit about the different structures. How do you organize the team and coordinate across your state?
So twice a month we meet, and that seems to be pretty good. And for us, that's our cadence. This is our fourth year, and it's gotten just to be a natural conversation that's going on during the week, and we meet every 2 weeks, via Zoom, and that's the extent of our structure per se. And
I think that makes sense, and because there's something to be said about structure. There's also something to be said if you're too structured, it can just make things a little too cumbersome.
I think the key thing is communications. We have that chat, and that goes that ebbs and flows as well. But sometimes, when we're working up to something, we're doing more on the chat than we are on Zoom, and then we call people and that sort of thing.
Now, you said something that I want to actually bounce over to Jan to answer, because I do know this is something that goes across all legislative committees, and that is, you mentioned the legislative slate, or I think we would typically call it the legislative priorities. So can you just speak to how do you determine the legislative priorities? How do you select those? And I guess move forward with it, because it can feel very overwhelming. There's a lot of bills that a state is dealing with every day or every year. So how do you work through that?
Basically, when we want to select our legislative priorities, we go down, first of all, we start always with a parental rights viewpoint. So that's the first tenet of any priority that we have, that it has to support parental and family rights. Then we start looking at different issues. We look at the different parts of parental rights, like medical decisions, educational decisions, decisions for your children. And we go through those and set as our priorities what we think are the most important. For example, we start out with protect parental rights, and then we talk about transparency in education. You can't have parental rights without knowing what's going on in the school. You have to talk about kids being safe in school. So we talk about school safety. We talk about parental access to schools. So we start debating these different priorities and really try to focus on those that we think will be the most important for families and for children.
So Jenny, they're talking about some really interesting points here, and I'm sure you have seen this as well. Now you talk about being kind of new to your committee. So I'd love to, maybe you can unpack a little bit about how you do it in your state, and how do you pick the bill, and then how do you track it through? So how do you find the good bills, the ones to track through, to push? How do you do that?
Well, thankfully, they've managed to foster on our legislative committee a lot of really good working relationships with the legislatures here. And so they are constantly in communication. And I say they, I mean, everyone on the committee has relationships with their representatives. And so we're making those phone calls regularly. And some of those bills that are on our priorities list, which we have a one sheet. So we're finding that the relationships and the collaboration is the key, and just making those phone calls. In terms of tracking, luckily there's some women who really like the nitty gritty on our committee, and they are good at keeping up with the bills and the numbers and the session timelines and when it's coming up again, and they keep us informed. And the rest of us are out there doing the other types of work. We're fostering relationships, making those phone calls, sitting down and looking someone in the eye, and just meeting them on a human level, face to face, because I think that when you talk about things that matter with your children, people can relate with that, because there isn't anyone that doesn't understand. Everyone's been a child at one point themselves, and the impact of the adult influence and how we lead our children makes a big difference for everybody.
Boy, there's so much good advice packed in there. One of the things I'm hearing is, first of all, everyone can just breathe, because it's not like one person is responsible for absolutely everything.
Right.
We do this as a team, and each person, the strengths of each person are leveraged to ensure that there's success across the team. And I think that is super important. I'm also hearing that there's such great experience in different states. So to all our chapters, if your state doesn't have a legislative committee, or maybe you're struggling with trying to get things through and just not sure how to do it, you've got some great people here that you can reach out to that can give advice, or maybe some tips on how to be successful with your legislative committee and pushing your bills forward. So, and then the third thing I'd say that is I'm very consistently hearing, and it makes sense, is the importance of relationships, especially keeping those relationships going outside of session, and not just bombarding your representatives during session, and instead taking the time to get to know them outside of it. That's such a good point. And I'd love to hear, what has been your greatest legislative success in your state? And note, this may not be the passage of a bill specifically, it might be something else. But what would you say has been your greatest legislative success?
Yeah, I think we haven't had many victories in Jersey. The legislature has a supermajority. They in the assembly. We're in the minority in the Senate, and of course we have Mikey Sherrill now. That's the governor. So, but I think our strongest aspect that we've built over the years is the relationship that we have not only with the legislators, to the point where if they're going to have a barbecue at their house, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave me a call, or gave one of our members a call and say, come on over, bring the kids, that sort of thing. If we really want to get our bills passed and written and so on and so forth. So, I try to encourage all my members to run for office, even if it's commissioner or freeholder locally, school board especially. We need to run for office. That's my banner.
And I would say in local elections, I mean, that's what we talked about with Erica Sheets, that you can have not even just local elections, but especially there, you can win with such a small minority of voters, because there's just not a great turnout. And that has a huge impact on what happens especially in your local community. Jenny, let's jump over to you, and let's hear, what has been the greatest legislative successes in your state?
Okay, I don't know if I'm the most appropriate one to answer that question, because I'm only about 6 months into the legislative committee. I know that the ladies on the committee have been doing a lot of really good work And they've drawn a lot of attention to some very important topics. I know out in the western part of the state of North Carolina, they now have an ongoing Office of Civil Rights investigation related to the boys and girls bathroom situation, which is protecting, obviously daughters and girls in the schools. And that's getting public visibility and being addressed. I think that that's important. Where the legislature will lie in that situation, hopefully they can put in some more corrective measures to ensure the safety in bathrooms and public spaces at the schools. In terms of wins, our best wins are ahead of us, if you ask me, because we're not done yet.
I love that because I think it's important that we stay hopeful, quite frankly. I know I've been talking about that with some other folks that there's a lot of concerns I have for the future. I'm not going to lie, but I have hope for the future as well, because one of the best things about being a part of this organization is is connecting with other organizations and people and seeing how many people are actually in the fight. It can feel very much, if you don't talk to other people and if you do a little too much doom scrolling, it can feel very much that you're alone and fighting this battle alone, but that's not the case. There's a lot of good people that are working really, really hard, and it's very, very encouraging. So I strongly encourage people to get out, get involved, get connected, head over to momsforliberty.org to connect with your local chapter. And if you don't have a legislative committee, well, you can connect with Charlie, submit information, a request to be able to get one started in your state. And we will help you. We'll help you get started. All right, Jan, let's wrap it up with you. What would you say would be your first recommendation for people just getting involved? What's a realistic step for them to take to make a difference?
Go to meetings, ask to join, and you're there. Come on board.
I love it. I think we have hit some incredible points today. Thank you so much all for joining us today to talk and share your frontline experience, because you're out there pushing the hard work, building the relationships, getting the message across, and we really appreciate all the work you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Missy.
We've got several guests with us today. So we have Representative Samantha Fett from Iowa has joined us. Also, Die Hard and True for Moms for Liberty, as well as Kate Anderson from Alliance Defending Freedom, who is here to talk through the Speaks Act that was introduced by ADF, and our amazing Iowa chapters took it, ran with it, and actually passed it. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sam, right away. If you could just explain a little bit of the history, what was it, and what did you guys do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the time. So first of all, let's just define what the Speaks Act is. So what it stands for is Safeguarding Personal Expression in K through 12 Schools. That's really what it stands for. I was first introduced to it at the Moms for Liberty Summit in 2025. I was in the audience, and Kate was there with some others presenting, and I was vigorously taking notes because it was something that I had heard in my area, and it was finally just a structure that defines really taking serious what the First Amendment means for free speech for students, and it protects viewpoint discrimination, and it also allows for consistent application of what the First Amendment means to our students in schools. So, for example, we've had, when I introduced in Iowa after research from the Moms for Liberty Summit, I went home, drafted the legislation from the model policy, and immediately submitted it, and it got some good traction. I'm on the education committee. And what we started seeing was examples come forward from students across the state where they would have classroom assignments for art, where they could paint something that inspired them. And a young man who was in 8th grade shared that he was drawing a picture of a cross. And his teacher told him that that was not appropriate and religious symbols were not allowed in the project. This is a perfect example of how our First Amendment rights are being discriminated against, our students' rights are being discriminated against in public schools. They should have the opportunity to express their beliefs, whatever they are, equally, on equal terms as other students. So if other students are expressing their other religious beliefs or social beliefs or any of those things on equal terms, every student should have that opportunity. So this became really important, and I wanted to get it across the finish line. The state of Iowa is actually the first state to get it passed and signed by the governor in law across the country. So I'm really excited about that. But what it really means is we're shifting that culture. If we're going to are we serious about the First Amendment? Yes, we are. And this really sends that message, and it makes sure that our teachers, our educators understand what it really means to make sure that we're not discriminating against our students' beliefs.
The First Amendment it does feel like it's constantly under attack, but it also feels like it gets used or twisted or weaponized or not fully understood. So, Kate, maybe you can help us understand some of the background. What was going on in the country at the time? I don't know if people can remember. 2025 feels like a decade ago to me at this point, but maybe you can talk about some of the other cases or scenarios you were seeing and what led up to you drafting this.
Well, first, I got to say, I love everything about what Sam was able to share. It's fun when we're able to come together in conferences and really spark a change. Through Moms for Liberty, we've been seeing so much of that happening, and this is such a prime example of it. We were seeing some significant attacks on free speech for students in schools. There has been a long history in the case law protecting free speech. Cases that for decades have said that students do not leave their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door. And yet that was so much what was happening. We were seeing kids who were expressing particularly conservative or religious viewpoints that were being shut down at school in a way that was completely unfair and completely different than how their peers were being treated. So during COVID, we represented a little girl who in 2020 wore her mask to school that said, "Jesus loves me," and she was told that she had to take it off. We represented a boy, and his case went all the way up asking the Supreme Court to take the case because he wore a "there are only two genders" shirt in response to sharing his beliefs about gender when his school was advocating for radical gender ideology. And he was punished at school for wearing that t-shirt. And then in the time period right after, so recently, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We saw students wanting to paint the rock at school or take other measures to try to honor his legacy and support free speech in his honor, and they were being shut down and punished by schools. In addition to a growing history of school clubs that were being shut down because they were pro-life, religious in nature, TPUSA clubs, while other clubs were able to freely operate on campus and share their viewpoints. So exactly what was shared before about this act was important. We need to make sure that all students can speak their minds. The public schools should be a place for public debate, for students to be able to build their own views about the world and talk about those with their friends and be able to get used to talking about and defending their views in their class. And when the school steps in and tries to stop that from happening, particularly targeting certain viewpoints and certain religious beliefs, that is dangerous to free speech across the map. And it's not good for our kids or our schools.
That brought me back. Those talking about those different cases really just seriously brought me back. So I find it fascinating because some of these things seem so common sense and harmless, and I think so many of us relate to it. The idea of not being able to paint a cross or wearing a mask that says "Jesus loves me," which seems so incredibly benign. Why is it that religious expression in public schools remain such a hot topic?
Yeah, I think that, well, the number one thing is I think that there's just misinformation, the education on what the First Amendment actually means for the separation of church and state, what that really means. And so a lot of times we have schools that are just scared. They're just scared that they're going to be sued, or we don't want to dabble into these controversial issues. And so there's just a lot of confusion around it. And I think that this is a step forward in clarifying that for them, that this is allowed. This is the intent. And like he had mentioned before, we're seeing more and more attacks because I think that we're losing sight of what's intended with free speech. So I think that answers your question from my perspective.
A little bit. I actually want you to explain just a little bit more where you were talking about people misunderstanding the First Amendment and the idea of separation of church and state. Can you just explain that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that what they think is that there should be zero religion in schools. I think that in the public sector, we can't even speak the word religion, and that's just actually, it's wrong. It actually protects people from, they're allowed to express their religious beliefs in the public sector, including schools. It's just a misunderstanding. There's nothing really more to elaborate on that, except that they're scared that they're going to get sued for allowing those types of things, when honestly they should be worried about the opposite, in my opinion. Because
I'd like them to be worried about the opposite.
Yeah. So honestly, Missy, I think it just comes down to fear and not understanding. I mean, our teachers are being taught in their public universities, and this is not being discussed on what their freedoms are. And I think that's another fundamental issue. And so then they go to the public schools and they're thinking, well, no religious symbols are allowed because they just want to keep it completely neutral. Well, that's wrong.
That's right. And that's what I was looking for, was just a little bit of explanation about the fact that it doesn't mean that you can't speak your religion or talk about God or anything like that. However, and this is, I'm going to turn over to you, Kate, because I feel like you're going to be able to answer this part. I feel relatively comfortable saying that it seems, especially today, that certain religions, no need to say which one, tend to be more of a hot point than others. And so we see this, we see where suddenly it's okay for religious expression, and it's encouraged to have religious expression for, let's say, as an example, Islam. But if you're a Christian or a Jew, then you are reviled for, and you're called hateful because you have a cross or you have something that says Jesus loves me. So why do you think we're looking at that right now with that type of religious expression becoming or remaining a flashpoint in schools?
I think there's just been this shift coming off of the misunderstanding of the Establishment Clause, which was so well described there. There's been a history here of our country thinking that the Establishment Clause that says that the state cannot establish a religion, that means that the state can't tolerate any religion in the public sector, when the answer really is that the state is required not to treat one religion worse than the other, to tolerate all backgrounds and faiths, and to allow all to be exercised in the public sector. And I think we've just seen that misunderstanding come through in a way that really has attacked Christians, which is really who I think we're talking about here, and traditional values. So other faiths that carry traditional values about the family, about marriage, about things like identity and sexuality. And some of those moral-based, faith-based ideas are just becoming more and more attacked in the schools as our society moves away from some of those views. And I think you do see some people in the public schools that ideologically disagree and use their position to stop some of these ideas from being discussed in the public school, as well as the vast majority of people being just confused about how this comes into play. So I think there's both elements at work here.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. I think that makes sense. Why is it that student speech is potentially, could it be considered more vulnerable, perhaps? Should we just think that students could say literally whatever they want? Because I mean, as a parent and growing up in school, I wasn't allowed to say absolutely whatever. And let's not even talk about religion or anything like that. But what is it about student speech? Is there special restrictions, or is it different than regular speech?
Well, certainly a school needs to be able to keep order and manage the students during the school day. So there are limits to the speech in terms of where it reaches the level that it's disruptive in the classroom, is kind of the typical one we hear talked about in the case law and in the schools. But at the same time, students, just because they're in school, don't lose their rights. And I think that there's a little bit too much of the desire to control the classroom in a way that controls the speech of the students, instead of fostering the kind of kids that are going to grow into adults that can have healthy debate and discuss their viewpoints and really interact with other students and then other adults about these topics.
Especially with some of the things that we were seeing earlier in 2026 of student protests and stuff, it really raised questions. But we can get into that a little bit later, because I want to ask Sam, because then we're coming right up on the end of your segment. But I wanted to ask you a couple things real quick. So I'll combine it together and then let you take it. First of all, what tips would you give to other states that are looking to pass this? What are the first steps that they should take? And do you anticipate, or have you seen already, any legal or cultural resistance now that this was passed?
Well, number one, I think if Moms for Liberty or whoever those activist groups can work with legislators that have interest in this topic, and the model policy is there from ADF, and they can just apply it to their state. So from a legislative standpoint, it's easy for us to take that and apply it. You just need a champion that can communicate it and understand how it works in their state, finding those examples in the states so we can tell the story of why this is important. So I think that the application statewide or nationwide is easy. We just need 49 other representatives to sign on up and let's go. Because again, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is just codifying what we already know to be true. And typically a lot of these issues can be bipartisan. Now in Iowa, it wasn't bipartisan. There was some issues, but I think that it's mostly because I added a little bit to the bill that includes professional development for teachers, superintendents, school board members to review the federal guidance on expression of prayer in schools, because I thought that would be helpful for context for them to understand why we're doing this. And so a lot of that piece, anything with professional development added to teachers, you have people push back on that because of time and resources. But I think that this is worth it. So we haven't seen any pushback as far as legal issues, because at the end of the day, this is solid. This is set on Supreme Court precedent, and we're winning here. And we're just reminding people that freedom of speech exists, and we're taking it serious. And here's an outline of how serious we're taking it, if they have any questions.
Awesome. I love that. I'm actually surprised that you haven't had push resistance. I don't know. I feel like anytime we take steps forward that we end up seeing resistance coming back. So that's really encouraging.
I'll keep you updated. But
yeah, that's true. I should knock on wood, because just because you haven't yet doesn't mean that you won't. Where can we find this model policy?
Well,
I can say that we'll link to it on M4L Academy's website in particular and in the description. But other than that, where can we go? Where can our people find more?
My resource was ADF, so ask them. So
I would say reaching out to ADF through our legal intake, then they can connect with our legislative team who can provide information about any of our model bills, including this one.
Awesome. And is that just on your website? You can find, okay, legal intake. All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, Representative Fett, for joining us for this part of the conversation. We are so proud of what Iowa is doing. It seems like you're always bringing us these great success stories. And I know that you've had some major battles. So hang in there and keep making us proud.
All right. Thank you. Will do.
Boy, we have covered so much, and truly that is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to dip your toe into the legislative process, start by simply introducing yourself to your representatives. Let them know you're human and build that connection. Then if or when you reach out in the future, they'll be able to put a face to a name, and that connection is invaluable. If you're in a chapter but your state has no legislative committee, reach out. Charlie is amazing, and we're here to help you get that started. It's another way to have an impact in your state and help defend parental rights. I'm so glad you joined us today for this insight into legislative advocacy with Moms for Liberty. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really does help the algorithm. And then share it with another parent or friend, and then go make it happen. go introduce yourself to your representatives. Remember, as James Madison said, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. And that, of course, is the mission of M4L Academy. Class dismissed.